And what a turnout. Now, one of the most important things that needs to be said and heard is that we will get you out of here at a reasonable time and be careful and effective with our use of time and be mindful of that. It's an informal gathering. If you would like to get up and get something to drink, use the restroom and all that stuff, please do so. My name is Grobbel. I come out of Traverse City. I've been an environmental consultant and environmental professional for nearly 30 years. About a third of that time with the DEQ doing cleanup of groundwater and soil, of petroleum and other toxic waste. About a third of that in the private sector as a consultant where I have worked for industry cleaning up oil and gas, petroleum, refined products around Michigan and the Great Lakes Basin. I've been lucky enough to teach at Michigan State University these matters and others, water law, environmental law, land use, and the like since 1992, where I'm adjunct. And my message, though, is really perhaps a little different than you may hear from some other people. I'm very critical of this industry in Michigan. I'm critical of the DEQ's handling of it, and I will be completely honest with you about that. So, with that setting, we're going to hold questions to the end. I think one of the most important parts is the question and answer period. I have an 8-hour presentation I do on this topic. So I'm going to boil this down to about 30 minutes. I'm not going to hit everybody's topic, okay? But in questions and answers, we can get to most of that stuff. So I have a bit of a depressing tale to tell. So I want to start out with the good news, and we're going to end with the good news. The good news, there are things you can do. Number one, you have had this land use, really an industrial land use, foisted upon you in a residential area, and you need to organize. You are already beginning that process by coming to meetings like this. You need to organize in your community and have very good relations with the township officials and continue that. You need to organize and reach out to the other communities in Michigan that are facing the very same thing. You're not alone. I know that doesn't make you feel very good, but you're not. And I'm working with communities around Michigan on this topic on a whole bunch of different levels: litigation, a ballot initiative, working with the legislators, working at the local level to find creative ways to handle this. We're going to cover all those things. What are your rights as landowners we'll touch upon. That's a whole night in and of itself. Talk a bit about the public trust doctrine. Guess what, folks? It's not the industry's water. It's not their air. It's ours. We own it through the public trust doctrine, which I'll tell you about. I would ask you not to applaud. We're going to get through all this material, okay? And then at the end, you can applaud wildly. And then a little bit about private nuisance actions. You don't lose your rights when something moves in next to you. You still have your rights as landowners. And then we're going to focus primarily on local governmental authority and some creative things that are going on in Michigan at the township level. But first, I have to put on my professor cap and talk a little bit about the geology. Not a lot, but in Michigan, we are in the Michigan Basin. We are underlain by hard rock. The surface, anywhere from 4 feet to 400 feet or more, is glacial drift, soft material, sands and gravels that we're all used to, and clay and the like. But beneath that is our bedrock geology. Michigan is very unique. You can look at our bedrock geology as like a series of bowls, a small bowl inside of a larger bowl, inside of a larger bowl, inside of a larger bowl. And so if you go around the edges of lower Michigan, you run into the same formations. So what does that mean? That means if you're interested in drilling into this formation, it's very deep in the center and very shallow out on the edge. That's one of the parts of our story. So if we look at that in side view, we have a whole assemblage of different ages of limestones and a specialized limestone called a dolomite. And some of these limestones have hydrocarbons in them. Number one takeaway for tonight: whenever you're looking for oil, you're going to find, if you find it, you're going to find natural gas, oil, and brine or salt water in some percentage. They're going to be together. And actually, our geology, we were very shallow saltwater environments in Michigan through the millennia, through the millions of years, kind of like the Caribbean. Those areas got covered up, lithified, turned to rock, and some of them have oil and gas in them. So we find the fossils, we find limestones, all because of that shallow marine environment. And of course, the oil and gas and hydrocarbons are the breakdown of the living organisms that were in those shallow seas millions of years ago. Okay, we in Michigan have a long history of oil and gas development. That doesn't mean that we have all the answers. We have a long history. About 56,000 wells have been drilled in Michigan. We have today around 13,000, 15,000 of the oil and gas wells in some variety out there. And we are on the global map, on the national map, certainly, with the Antrim natural gas play that took place in the 80s and 90s on the northern tip of Michigan, lower Michigan. So some of the major trends we have, the Antrim shale, as I mentioned, a very important natural gas development. And then we have some interest in this deep, very thin shale called the Collingwood, and that's the one that you hear about being fracked. The hydraulic fracking rather, happens primarily in that thin, very deep limestone in some places in Michigan. That's not your story here today. Your story here today is conventional oil and gas development and its hazards. We'll talk more about this as we go. So, I know it's a long way from the back of the room, but these are the major oil and gas formations that have been developed in Michigan. This deep Collingwood down here is the one that I just mentioned. The one that West Bay is interested in and has developed around lower Michigan is the Black River Trenton. It is a formation under that Collingwood, relatively deep down here, and one that doesn't require fracking by and large to extract hydrocarbon resources from it. If you ask where are the wells in Michigan, well, we've got this Niagaran Trend, we've got the Antrim Shale. You can see down here in southeast Michigan, there's a fair amount of activity. And one of the stories that I would like to leave with you today is this kind of industry is coming out of the state forests and into our neighborhoods. It's coming closer and closer to residential land use around lower Michigan, and is certainly a source of concern. So, one of the things that got me interested in this whole topic was I had, a few years ago, kept being told by DEQ folks and by industry that, hey, you know, we put all these wells in, there are no problems, you know, it's a safe industry, we have the toughest regulations in the nation, you know, trust us. And I said, well, I used to be one of you, and I know I've sat on many a cleanup and spent years and years cleaning these properties up, and there are problems and there are risks. So one of our challenges tonight is to try to put that in some context, some appropriate context of what those risks are and what we can do with them. Yes, we've been fracking in Michigan since the 50s. The type of fracking that they're worried about today is in no way compared to the traditional fracking that has been done historically in Michigan in that Antrim shale. Much less water use, much more with the current variety. And again, the truck trips, everything is quite different, orders of magnitude difference between the old style and the new style. But again, that's not your primary concern here tonight. I'm presenting that because I think there's a lot of confusion about some of this, and I wanted to get that information out. Another thing I guess I should tell you is this entire presentation will be given to the township, who will put it wherever they would like to make it available to you if you would like to see any of these slides down the road, on their website or wherever. Frac fluid, as we know, has a number of chemicals. These chemicals are put in mixtures. There is some ability of the oil and gas industry to hide and trade secret some of those components and recipes. We've had up to 21 million gallons used in natural gas wells in Kalkaska County to frack. So wide uses of water, and about a third of that or more stays in the formation, and the rest comes up. And in Michigan, it needs to be placed in above-ground storage tanks and then trucked off to primarily deep injection wells. Deep injection wells are a whole other evening topic. We won't go there tonight, but it's that onloading, offloading, transport, and trucking of the material that also represents a significant risk. If you are interested in this, I have a white paper that's on the internet with the Friends of the Jordan website on deep injection wells in Michigan if you're interested. Okay, why are we here? Well, there are hazardous substances associated with oil and gas. Not just foreign things that are being brought in, but the product itself has a number of carcinogens, heavy metals, and here's a list of some that are all toxic or many of which are toxic to human health at certain levels and to aquatic and natural systems. Okay, in Michigan we've got regulations that when wells go in, there are 3 casings or more, but 3 casings, and in between each casing we have cement. One of the primary things that we're relying upon to protect our environment is that those cement jobs are done well, and they won't fail in time. And if you talk to anybody in the industry, they will tell you that is the weak link. When there are problems, that's where it occurs. And it has occurred in Michigan, and it will continue to. If you look at the natural gas well information that's out there, industry themselves admits that they have failures, on a lifetime, life cycle scale, relatively commonly with oil and gas wells due to poor cement jobs or failed cement jobs over time. There's a strong correlation then between environmental risk and how well these wells are completed, as they call it, with cement. So, it's all about the cement, as I've been told, around the nation, in Texas and North Dakota and other places I've been to look at this. And one of my messages too is it's not just at the wellhead, but it's the human element. Most of my career has been spent cleaning up petroleum in places where humans made errors. Leaving valves open, backing into pipes, running over components, failing to close valves, failed valves, these kinds of things can happen. And the rupture of old pipelines at wells and elbows. So, we have regulations in place, permits are required. As you all have found out, the notification requirements are almost non-existent, aren't they? Yeah. It's very difficult to find out what's going on, where it's going on, and who's doing it. The DEQ does now have a voluntary comment link on their webpage that if you do find out about a permit, you can make comment to them. They are under no obligation to respond. And every time I've talked to them, they are under no obligation to even move the comments on. But prior to the Scioto Township well, the Wing 115 well that is going in now, they had 6 comments and not advanced any of them or responded to any of them. In Scioto alone, they got 60. So I would encourage you to look at that. One of the things that is in the law, that if there is a permit proposed, the DEQ has to notify the county. Has to be on file with the county. And if you're in a city or township of 70,000 or more, then the notification goes to them, and they can comment, and the DEQ has to respond. One of the few tools you have is to work with your local units, the county in particular, to make sure that you know what's happening and where it's happening. Okay, another thing you should be aware of. Not all cleanups are the same. The group of DEQ I worked with, very rigid guidelines, very rigid standards of investigating and cleaning up or remediating contamination. The oil and gas lobby in Michigan is extremely powerful. They have a different approach, which I call a qualitative approach, where they generally keep digging, keep removing materials if it looks bad or it smells bad. When I worked in the DEQ, we called that the lick your finger and stick it in the air approach. And they don't do the discrete sampling until the very end when they think that the cleanup is done, to save money. And that's been allowed. That's allowable under our law in Michigan. Well, it doesn't work. I have had clients, an organic dairy farmer in Gladwin County, where he was told by the DEQ everything was on track. He had 2 pipeline spills on his property, and he had to hire an attorney and myself, and we found pure crude oil at the ground surface, unremediated, during a time when we were being told by the state everything was on track and heading toward cleanup. So, citizen vigilance, the reporting of problems from citizens is always the way it works, as opposed to the DEQ running around hundreds of them and hundreds of vehicles checking everything out, in my opinion. It's also hard to find out where the problems are. Under our former Governor Engler, they discontinued the list. They used to have a publicly available list, like the Superfund list of where oil and gas contamination sites are. Now, you have to know who to talk to, and they will send it to you. There's his name, there's his phone number. It took me a couple of years to get that list, but now that I got it, I want to share this information with you to find out where these sites of contamination are. And Mr. Pettit will email you several Excel files to tell you where they are. Okay, in southeast Michigan, there hasn't been a whole lot of oil and gas activity as a DEQ defines Southeast Michigan, these counties, and only 5 sites where the spills have been reported. If we move a little bit further to the west, however, in what they call the Lansing district in these neighboring counties, our oil and gas company who's going to speak tonight owns 10 or about a third of those spills in those communities. So when they tell you that there's never going to be a problem and you know, no fear, dig a little deeper and find out what the actual track record is. It's about the water. I think we're all concerned about water, we're concerned about air quality, and drinking water in particular. There have been a number of studies done around the nation, and some of these are highly controversial, but they show there is a correlation, there can be a correlation between spills at oil and gas sites and contamination of groundwater, and in some cases drinking water. We have in Kalkaska County last summer areas where active fracking has dewatered residential wells. One residential well in particular that I worked on across the street from a oil and gas site, about 1,250 feet away. This family, the Senskys, Mrs. Sensky was born in that house, been there for 80 years. And when Encana came in to put in a natural gas well here, they went to both homes and said, would you like to have a paid vacation for 2 weeks while we drill? And Mrs. Sensky said no. Anyway, shortly after the beginning of drilling operations and completion operations, their well went dry periodically, on and off, eventually burned up the pump. What we had found, and that's the site, was that the pumping of water at the pad itself to drill the well dropped the water table 80 feet. 1,200 feet away, Mrs. Sensky's well dropped about 11 feet, and that was below her pump, and she lost her electric pump, submersible. Another issue that was found out if you go to any of these sites is, at least during fracking operations for natural gas, an extraordinary amount of dust, silica fine sand dust, which is that proppant that is used in frac fluid. So that brings us to air emissions. I'm going to, in the interest of time, not go through a whole bunch of this, but we do have significant health concerns associated with oil and gas development. One of the primary ones is all of the soot and the particulate matter 10 that comes from just the operation of many, many, many diesel engines on these essentially small industrial facilities for a few months at a time. That has been found to have caused health impacts in and around the country, breathing difficulties, headaches, eye irritation, the mucous membranes in a number of states, something that hasn't been well studied but is beginning to be. It has also shown an increased risk of cancers in a University of Colorado study in 2012, and the question is how much of the increase is acceptable. Well, we used to have 1 in a million acceptable risk in Michigan. Now we're 1 in 100,000 under our regulations. Okay, truck traffic. Probably don't need to tell you this, but it comes up later. Significant amount of truck traffic for a short amount of time, a matter of a few months when these facilities go in. And when one well goes in and is successful, there are other wells soon to follow. And soon to follow that are usually pipeline networks that go to a central processing facility and or to tank batteries, where you begin to see an industrial network pop up relatively quickly. Now we have followed West Bay around to other counties, Jackson and other counties, in litigation that I'm working on with folks in Scioto Township, and determine just how quickly those things follow. And they follow quite quickly. Another part of this is the disposal of brine. If the brine doesn't have a significant petroleum component in it, it can be legally spread on gravel roads. There are a number of places in suburban Detroit where there are a number of gravel roads. You guys have a little more pavement over here than I've seen other places. But this is another concern, and it comes up again in a few minutes. Noise, as was mentioned. The regulations say that at 1,320 feet, no more than 45 decibels. There are regulations on the books that need to be enforced. And the DEQ can make a finding of nuisance noise and nuisance odor. And you need to be aware of that. In my work, we've been successful turning back increased natural gas operations in the neighboring county because of a history of nuisance odors in the past. And as you know, the light pollution, the disruption of this industry, not compatible with residential land use. Okay, the track record. A couple of things. Some of these big, deep, unconventional, horizontally fracked wells, one of them never went online. It was never put online in completion. It was determined that over 50% of all the couplings in the production casing were the wrong size. A $14 million investment in the ground that never pumped a day. And I want you to be aware of that, because when you hear the "trust me" line from both the state and or the industry, here's a little insight into what the track record truly is, if you look. One well in Benzie County did have frac fluid leak at the wellhead as they tried to complete it. In July of 2013, flowback waste from fracking was spilled into the environment at a facility in Kalkaska County. A Chevron site in Antrim. It sat idle because the drillers dropped some tools down the pipe and they had to fish them out. It took them several months to fish those out. Reading the file, they as well had spills and leaks at that facility. One company in the Traverse City area spread 3 tanker loads of brine on county roads in Benzie County in 2013 at limits that were nearly 2,000 times what the DEQ allows. Okay? 4 times and 5 times above the direct contact human health hazard if you touched it. Now, these things aren't supposed to happen. Regulations are in place. Industry and government tell you they don't, but they do. And I want you to be aware of that, not as a scare tactic, but as a reality check, and ask those tough questions. And of course, a fire and explosion occur. Okay, moving on to what can we do? Well, it's important to be in contact with your DEQ person and to treat them respectfully, but to get information flow and establish a good working relationship. Public trust doctrine, all the way back to ancient Rome. Running water, heat and light, the sun, wildlife, those things belong to us as citizens. And government is there to protect them as trustees for us. They don't own it, we do. Well, similarly, that is the case with water. And the Michigan Environmental Protection Act actually puts that into legislation in Michigan that prohibits the pollution, impairment, and destruction of the air, water, and other natural resources in the state. Importantly, and DEQ will fight about this and will not admit it, they are compelled to consider cumulative environmental impacts under the MIPA standard, the Michigan Environmental Protection Act, when they issue any permits. That's part of the litigation that's going on right now in Ann Arbor, Scioto Township, where a very weak, very short-term, very non-probing environmental assessment was done in the approval of that well. About time. And it's looking at cumulative impacts over time. Landowners, if you haven't already done it, and how many people here are on private water residential wells? Okay, just a few. If you are on private residential wells and in proximity to oil and gas, have those wells tested in advance of any well drilling and have that report provided to you. Landowners, if you're approached by a landman because you have mineral rights, get a good lawyer. One that has actually got experience in the field. You'll be thankful that you did in terms of potential damages and restoration. I toured a very large 53 square mile ranch in West Texas, where the landowner allowed Hunt to drill, and shared the fact with me that they actually make more money off of damages per year than they do from oil royalties. So something to think about. And getting an experienced lawyer is very important. Okay, private tort actions. Recently, in April, a Texas jury awarded $3 million to a family from health impacts because they were surrounded by and in close proximity to oil and gas sites. That's one of the first of its kind. And, you know, we can't all litigate ourselves to solutions, but that is something that people have been taking notice of. It's important to remember that mineral rights, once severed, are severed for good. So if you do lease them, if you do sever them in any way, sell them even, you know, they're going to be gone. And that surface estate, what you retain, is inferior or subservient to that mineral rights owner's right to get to those mineral rights. And as you probably have noticed from the regulations, if you've looked into it, it's a pretty lopsided arrangement in terms of the power of companies to go after that resource and the power of landowners to limit it. We also have studies around the nation that show a direct correlation and association between the loss of property value and proximity to these facilities. So I don't think that's a surprise to you guys. Okay, importantly, as was mentioned before, Michigan's Zoning Enabling Act specifically says that townships and counties cannot regulate oil and gas. Can't regulate oil and gas. They can regulate pretty much everything else except prisons, mental health facilities, things like that, and oil and gas. However, there are local units of government who are trying to find a way to do this, and I'm working with several of them. I want to talk to you about that. The first step at the township level is you have to make sure your master plan supports environmental protection and hopefully specifically says that oil and gas and its environmental and human health impacts are going to be regulated by the township to protect its citizens and the environment. Then you've got choices of creative zoning, what are called police powers. Things like noise ordinances and junkyard ordinances are police powers, different than zoning. And then you have to decide what fits in your township. Now, zoning only goes forward. If it's passed and enacted, it goes from that date forward. Whereas police power authority at local units of government go backward, and they can regulate pre-existing conditions. It's an important distinction to keep in mind. Another approach that some people have talked about, some attorneys, is you don't regulate the wellhead, but everything else associated with it, and do that in zoning. Now, will that survive a legal challenge? Probably not, but that's one of the approaches folks are taking. And so if you already have good environmental protection language on your books, you can regulate what are called associated facilities and uses. I would like to jump ahead to something a little more creative, though. And this is what is called a consent to use agreement. And we're going to close with this. A consent to use agreement or a franchise agreement. How many people have been to a fast food restaurant in the last 24 hours? Be honest. All right, you're typically at a franchise where there's an independent operator that is operating there under certain rules to be able to call themselves McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's a franchise, right? You're familiar with the term. Well, there are communities in Michigan that have been regulating pipelines for many years under franchise agreements. And one of the thoughts is that you could actually require oil and gas developments to come into the township and sign a contract before they use any public roads, any public land, or any public easements for oil and gas extraction. And that those conditions be crafted and specific toward environmental protection, notification, what happens when there is a spill, full disclosure of all the chemicals being used, what are the haul routes, how many times are trucks leaving, and where is the stuff going, all that kind of thing. So there are a few communities working on that right now. Tonight, Scioto Township over by Ann Arbor is considering these things, and they're right now voting on it as we speak. Edwards Township in Ogama County has taken this exact mechanism to public hearing and to the Township Board. Last week, the Township Board sent it back to the Planning Commission for more work. But there are some communities in the Grand Rapids area, up north, and here in Southeast that are beginning to look at this and working with their attorneys to try to craft it. Emergency response plans. A number of the communities I've worked with in the Grand Rapids area have had first responders on these truck spills and pipeline spills and the like, and they don't have any information about what was being used. So a strong interest in getting that improved. Making sure that these companies actually have insurance, have set aside money to fix roads, have enough money to cover environmental cleanups, follow the more strict rules, the Part 201 rules in Michigan, rather than the 615 rules, such as that. Okay, that's a lot. That was boiling down a whole bunch of stuff. More importantly, let's open it up to questions and comments.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it very much. For those of you that just came in after you got home from work and were able to get here maybe a couple minutes late, the format will be you'll come to this podium, ask your questions. I will write it down and we'll ask Mr. Grobbel to respond. What I didn't say, but I think I'm going to insert now is I have some questions and I'm going to go first so I can get them in. You mentioned that it's important from Mr. Pettit from MDEQ to get the information regarding spills or contamination that goes at the site. We have learned of a report that's called a report of spill or leakage. We've been asking for that report. Are we asking for the right thing?
Okay, it's difficult to get meaningful information. We have, through Mr. Pettit, a statewide list that is relatively up to date, but requires some work on the part of field staff to keep it up to date. That is a comprehensive statewide list. If you want to find out what's actually going on, it requires us to go to these individual DBQ offices under the Freedom of Information Act and actually sit there and review the files. Not an easy way to find out what the track record is at any given well site. And I know this because how I actually make my living is in courtrooms as an expert witness, where I've gone and read these files to find out the track record at one of these sites.
We, last night in our community, passed a moratorium on drilling, and some of the residents were concerned that is that our only tool? And one of the tools we talked about last night was nuisance. You've touched upon nuisance, but you also mentioned a part of this process that emits a significant amount of dust that causes eye irritants and other skin irritants. What is the activity that we should be concerned about that creates that side effect that would help us with our nuisance?
Okay, that's a multi-part question. I'm getting up there in age. I'll try to remember all the parts. First of all, the prevention of nuisance is really the basis of zoning and township land use regulation. It's really to prevent nuisance. And a nuisance is the unreasonable interference with the comfortable use and enjoyment of another's property. If you unreasonably interfere with your neighbor, that's a violation per se of zoning typically. But my message is really a bit broader, and that is that zoning is rife with difficulties in terms of this industry, this land use. And so there are other alternatives that we're trying to explore that would be more effective. What was the other part of the question?
Well, the question is, what should we be on the alert for? What type of activity creates that?
The other thing is that a moratorium is temporary, and it has to be in good faith. If you're working on a zoning question or a local question that's relatively straightforward, maybe a 6-month moratorium could be put in place to work on it, and no activity occurs until we're done. In a case like this, with a more complicated land use, maybe a 12-month moratorium is more reasonable, but there is no hard and fast number, but it has to be reasonable. The things that you want to be concerned about, and this is no surprise, truck traffic, noise, dust, the possibility of spills, and then the migration of those spills to some sensitive resource.
My last question, and you mentioned that I believe it's the 1,345 decibel test for MDEQ in terms of the sound from the site. Would they have an exclusive jurisdiction to enforce that, or could the township?
Yeah, good question. You know, the township hasn't lost all of their authority. I would suggest that the Zoning Enabling Act does not prevent a township from enforcing its own police-powered noise ordinance, irrespective of the source.
Okay, let's go to somebody without a high, squeaky voice like myself. Yes, ma'am. You're first, and you'll state your question if you'd like.
Okay, I have a 3-minute question.
3 minutes?
I would like to get your advice on it. My name is Jennifer Sheridan. I lived most of my life in Rochester Hills in Shelby Township, and I was a graduate of Utica High School. I'm going to start my speech out with a quote from Lear Keith, and the quote says, "Understanding the task of an activist is not to negotiate systems of power with as much personal integrity as possible. It is to dismantle those systems. All of our advancements and innovations will be in vain if we cannot solve these impending energy crisis issues. What I'm about to tell you in the next few minutes could change the world, but it takes a mighty brave and courageous person. I am a mother, a teacher, an environmental activist, and a concerned citizen. I'm the creator of a pilot fundraising program called the World Up Fundraiser that could save taxpayers $30 billion a year, and have also started a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo that could shift the entire educational, economic, and environmental systems of the world. I've just recently written a book about these concepts, seeing that it can bring taxpayers over $30 billion in savings, and to help strengthen and sustain local communities, the environment, and save orphan children. My book is boldly called I Vote for a Radical Jesus for President, Eat Dirt, Monsanto, Love, Frickin' Frack. During my research for the book, I watched 2 movies one night in succession. Why in the World Are They Spraying by Michael Murphy, starring Dane Wakington of geoengineeringwatch.org, and Gasland by Josh Fox. After seeing the water test results from Josh Fox, taken from Demick, Pennsylvania, that shows aluminum, barium, and strontium, and many other strange chemicals found in the water near fracked wells, and then seeing the air quality results taken from the movie Why in the World Are They Spraying by Dane Wigington, showing air particulates of aluminum, barium, and strontium, and other chemicals. It doesn't take a scientist or a genius to make a connection. Aluminum, barium, and strontium are elements found deep within the earth. Please answer this question for me. What are heavy metal elements found deep within the earth doing in our air supply? Have you ever stepped outside and looked up to the sky to see a grid pattern of white lines many people think are called contrails? They're not. They're actually called chemtrails. Josh Fox stated in the documentary Gasland that the fracking industry requires 1,150 truckloads to set up each well. 600 of those semi-trucks contain fresh water. After the well is dug, it takes another 200 to 300 semi-trucks to remove the contaminated wastewater from the site. With over 500,000 frac wells in the United States that can be refracked over 18 times, requiring up to 8 million gallons of water per frac job. The math on how much wastewater has to be disposed is 1.35 times 10 to the 13th power. In a public statement given by the oil and gas industry, they said that the task of disposal of wastewater is the most difficult problem of hydraulic fracturing. Isn't it about time to end our addiction to oil? Even if this project has nothing to do with fracking, the oil industry has monopolized the market on oil-based products in the world, in which every plastic container in the world is
I think we
oil-based.
need to be respectful of the other people who'd like to speak.
I would
So
like
let's
to
wrap it.
finish. Of humanity.
I would like to
All right, so we did get a question.
I'm very sorry, it's not a self-promotion hour. I just want to know, listen, I have talked to Helen Slotchday. She is the environmental lawyer who just won the Golden Environmental Prize Award that has banned fracking in 170 communities in New York.
Okay, thank you.
So-
We have your comment, and I appreciate it. You had a question, I want to just ask. This is not a fracking well, is that correct?
That's my understanding. I'm a visitor to your community. You know more about this well than I do, but it's my understanding that it is not to be fracked. It will be likely acidified, stimulated, which is done commonly. But the Black River Trenton typically is not fracked in lower Michigan.
Okay, let's go to the next question then, please.
Yes, hi, my name is Robert Murphy. I'm a Romeo area resident. And even though we seem like we're worlds apart, because I'm just on the other side of 26 Mile, what happens here could eventually happen north of 26 Mile. I received a letter from Mr. Staticus, the township supervisor, and to me, it seems vague and without a lot of specifics. It doesn't address the real issues that DEQ has with stipulating the regulations. Should I have a creek or a natural pond, I can't improve it or anything of this sort. But with this 5022 regulation, they've effectively silenced everybody's First Amendment rights by not granting any public comment period. And the other issues that I have, because I took liberties and went over to the site, there was no environmental fencing situated around the area. There was no security perimeter. There was no public safety measures, such as a fence to keep children, dogs, other folks within a certain proximity of the wells. I could have walked right on top of the wellhead platform. There's no air monitoring. And I have a hard time believing in this government, with all the consultants, the lobbyists, the advisors, and the environmentalists, that nobody knew in advance that this was coming down. We've got 23-mile Ford Road plan. the former Ford plant, I understand because, again, we live up in the Romeo area. We get news, we seek it out. The Ford plant, the water table has been contaminated. Now, this is just north of that. If the aquifer is flowing into that direction, are these folks' water going to be unstable? And I made, one last thing. This morning in my shop, I saw this beautiful big piece of glass. And I made this item up, and I think it's pretty appropriate. Is this what government means by the new government transparency? It's just frosted glass, folks.
Well, thank you for your comments. I think many of us in communities that I'm working with are finding ourselves a bit behind the 8 ball. There's a very steep learning curve. These regulations are complex, but they can be fixed in many, many, many ways, including a number of them you mentioned. That's not going to happen without the political support of the elected officials that have already introduced themselves.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody it's question and answer so we can get everybody's questions in. Quickly, can you explain, we keep on hearing over and over again, we've been conventionally drilling in Macomb County for 25 years. What does conventionally drilling mean in the oil industry? And furthermore, we keep on hearing, well, we're not fracking, but when you do your homework, it's enhancing the pores and fractures through chemicals. Can you explain what enhancing with chemicals means also? Those 2 questions.
Okay, real quickly, there's been a lot of concern about what's called high volume unconventional fracking. That's not your story in this community, that's the Gasland Ruby story. A different technology, a different formation, a different well type, and a much deeper formation than a well typically that goes horizontally. And here is a summary of the differences between the two. The traditional oil and gas is not new to Michigan, but does represent significant environmental risk and hazard to communities that you should be aware of, and that's been my message tonight I've been trying to convey. Yes, these wells are often treated with acids. There are many reasons why this is done, to open up the well itself in many ways and to allow for hydrocarbons to be extracted. And you know, it's often the case that pipes in the ground foul, pipes in the ground clog, chemically, mineralogically, biologically, and typically the stimulation is done to improve one of these formations and the well itself. And that's usually what it is.
My name is David Kiley, and I promise this will lead to a question, but it's actually going to be a question for the room. I am a member, not an officer, but a member of Citizens for Oil-Free Backyards, and I came up here to support you all from Scioto Township. A long drive. Our board is voting tonight, as yours did. We've been at this a few months now, and my information, I can't confirm it to be final, but my information is that we will pass a moratorium tonight. The thing that I just wanted to make sure everybody knows, and I had no idea there would be this many people, but I have about 200 flyers on the table from our organization if you want some information. We are litigating, our group, our nonprofit grassroots citizens group, we raise money out of our wallets to litigate West Bay. We've been to court in Washington County. We did not get a favorable decision. We are going to Lansing now for another day in court. But we have momentum here because there are already 2 bills with bipartisan support to roll this back. And so the key issue here, I'm not going to talk about drill baby drill, I'm not going to talk about energy independence. What I do want to talk about is local control. The thing that got me fired up as a citizen, look, I put gas in my car too, but when West Bay came to Scioto, this is the way the law is written for all the oil and gas companies who, by the way, wrote the law themselves that they passed in Lansing, that they are exempted from the process that we all have here with board. If you're Starbucks and want to come in to Shelby or Scioto, the board gets to tell you how high the building can be, what the facade can look like, because the citizens here want to keep an aesthetic, want to keep a quality of life. Oil and gas, the way the law is written, doesn't have to go through any of that. But we're fighting it, and we're showing success, and I urge you to keep it up, because I think, no matter what your politics are, I think you're the same as us. You want to have control over what happens in Shelby, right? Yeah. Right? So I just want to say we support you. We will help you in any way we can, and take the fight on. Thank you.
John Duffy, 6817 Muirfield. Just a quick comment, a question. This gentleman here kind of addressed it. I just moved to the area a year ago to be right next to Stony Creek. And now they're telling me at 26th Mountain they're going to build, West Bay is also going to build a new drilling rig right there. One of the things, and I looked up Mr. Grobbel and this gentleman here, Scioto Township is doing everything that we want to do too. And they've got that article at the Ann Arbor Independent. They have three Democratic representatives are going to do everything they can to try to get the laws changed. But guess what? Democrats don't control any part of the government. The Republicans do, and my neighbor, Pete Lund, 2 houses down, this well is going up in his backyard, and mine. And Pete Lucido lives right across the street. Mr. Brandenburg's nearby too. The Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the governorship. And I think this is unintended consequences. We really thought that this law, because I pump gas too, I'm not opposed to gas well drilling, but you said, sir, all of these 57,000 wells pretty much have been in the forest, but now they're coming into our backyards. I think all of us here, primarily the Republican area, we need to tell our reps, the people who have the power, as Mr. Brandenburg said, these bills are being introduced. So my final question is, will these bills supersede what has already been done? Will they mandate you've got to take these wells out and you're finished? Or would it be for any new wells that may come forward? Either way, tell all your reps, the guys that have the power, Lund, Lucido, Brandenburg, and Governor Snyder, they have the power to change this, and they can do it.
There are two things you never want to see being made. I think there actually are three, but the old adage is sausage, law, and I would add to that, amorous activities between your folks. Those are the three. And what starts in the legislative process is not necessarily what comes out, is the point. And so, a couple things directly. Small fixes have been proposed. Really minor, important, but very minor things. There's a comprehensive rewrite of Part 615 that has to occur. The rules and regulations that are in play here for this industry. Comprehensive, all kinds of things. Why is there only one monitor well on a drill pad when you have to have at least three to know which way groundwater is flowing? I mean, really simple stuff, and some really important things like notification to you all, giving you the meaningful opportunity to participate. Many, 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 many things need to be fixed. The Scioto people in a couple of months organized, became a 501c3, hired an attorney, got 3 resolutions, Township, City of Ann Arbor, and Washington County against the drilling, have hired a lobbyist, are working with the League of Conservation Voters on a ballot initiative. What I'm trying to say is there's momentum and there are some coattails that are willing to be ridden if you organize and work with them, and they need your support. You don't need to join their litigation, but you can certainly join their ballot initiative or whatever else appeals.